Welcome to what I hope will be the last video on verse 1 of chapter 1. In the previous video, I had concluded that when Paul said that he did not receive his apostleship from men, he was talking about the conferring of that office to him by the other apostles in any kind of public ceremony. He did not receive it as a gift. He received it from Jesus Christ himself. And so that meant that his apostleship was on the same level as theirs was. He wasn't a member of the 12, but he had received his apostleship directly through Jesus, from Jesus himself, just like 10 out of the 12 apostles on the inner circle had received their office. So he owed them nothing. His authority was not subordinate to theirs. It wasn't derivative. He was an apostle of equal standing with them. And then he goes on into the next phrase, in which he says that his apostleship was not through man, singular man, using the preposition dia. I think in this instance, he's using dia to convey the cause of his apostleship. I think apo he was talking about the agents through which he had received the office, and now he's talking about the cause. Now, the word man, it's the ordinary Greek word for man, anthropos, and it's used in Greek not only to mean a specific man, but also to mean human nature, humanity in in a more abstract sense. And so he could be using this to mean that he did not receive the office of apostle through human nature. Now, one of the reasons he might say that is it was possibly well known even by that time, this is pretty early in Paul's life, that he was an assertive, abrasive, aggressive, he was pushy in regard to his own agenda. He was a force to be reckoned with. That was true before he became a Christian. You can see that in the account of his life. He became a leader at a very young age of the organized opposition to the Christian movement. He was aggressive. He was energetic. And his opponents in Galatia might have been saying that, hey, Paul is listened to mostly because we can't shut him up. You know, he's the loudest guy in the room. He's a dominating personality. It doesn't mean that he's more important or that his ideas are more authoritative. It just means that, you hear him more because he's louder than everybody else. That might be one of the things that they were suggesting, in which case the Galatians would have known that by now. Paul had spent a considerable amount of time among them, and he had suffered with them. He had confronted crowds of opponents there, people who were upset at his preaching, crowds of pagans and crowds of Jews, crowds of wealthy people, crowds of angry mobs, etc. He was a strong personality, and they knew that. what good would it do him to deny that? But actually, I think he's getting to something a little bit more impersonal here when he uses not through man. He's referring to the process by which men gain authority. Among men, normally speaking, a person is given a minor job and has to work his way up to something more important. You have to climb the ladder. You have to start in the basement and work your way up rank by rank, step by step. It's you have to claw your way to the top, I think is the way a popular book said it. It's competition. It's people, there's fewer openings on the next level up, and you have to compete for them. You have to prove that you're better than other people so that you will be graduated to the next level up in the administrative chain. And that is not what Paul did. Actually, it's not what the other 12 apostles did. It's a luxury that God has that people don't have. We need to have people prove themselves, and sometimes God puts us through things like that. If you have been shown to be faithful in small things, and you can be trusted to be faithful in larger things, that's a good, general, wise principle. But that's not the way the Spirit always works. God has the luxury of being the creator of the universe, being the creator of you and all the other people around. He kind of knows what's going on, and so he can short-circuit the whole thing. He says, okay, you go right to the top. You are my pick. That's what happened with those 12 apostles. I mean, here Jesus is starting out, and he comes across these guys, and it's almost as if he were just pointing at people saying, you, and they follow him. I'm not saying it was random, but it was from your mending the nets, now you're a future apostle in the church that I'm going to create, and an authority in that. And of course he trained them for it, but the appointment to that level of authority in the future was done without any of the tiresome competition, working your way up the ladder kind of thing. Peter, the first time Jesus met Peter, he said, hey, you are Peter, and on this rock I will found the church. So right from the beginning, Peter was set aside as a major figure in what Christ was about to do. And that's the way he does things. He didn't need to have Paul go through a probationary period. He picked him and he put him at the top of the heap. It was his appointment to make. The Holy Spirit can do that, even though human beings feel uncomfortable sometimes with that process and maybe even don't recognize it. I think Paul is going a little bit further, because I think Paul is irritated with the personal kinds of allegations, the political maneuvering that his opponents are making in Galatia, trying to undermine his authority. And I think there's a veiled warning in this verse. Oh, you guys really want to play this game? I can play this game better than you can play this game. And I think you can see that in that phrase that comes right after, not through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father who raised him from the dead. Now that last phrase, and God the Father who raised him from the dead, that's kind of a generic phrase that can be tossed in anywhere, and it's always appropriate. And, when we read that, we just kind of pass over it. It's just something Paul liked to add whenever he's talking about Jesus. And God the Father who raised him from the dead, and so on. It's kind of formulaic, in other words. It could be formulaic. But I think Paul might have something else in mind here. I think he might be pointing in a subtle way to a fundamental difference between the way he received the office of apostle and the way the other 10 out of the 12 apostles had received their office. They'd all been appointed by Jesus, fair enough, and thus far then Paul is claiming equality. But there was a really significant difference between the way Paul received the office and the way they received the office from Jesus. They had all received the office while Jesus was alive. Before the crucifixion, before the resurrection, before the ascension. It was during a period of his existence that is referred to sometimes as when he was veiled in flesh. He had emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, and in that form of a servant, he had appointed the 12 disciples, the 12 apostles. Paul, on the other hand, was appointed an apostle by Christ after the resurrection, after God the Father had raised him from the dead, after he had ascended, after he had been glorified, after he had been given all authority in heaven and on earth, after he had come into his full non-emptied state, he appointed Paul. Now, which is more prestigious, being appointed by Jesus when he was emptied, taking the form of a servant, or when he was glorified and ruler of everything in heaven and on earth? Which might be more prestigious? Now, Paul doesn't make that argument, and maybe he didn't intend to. But I think there's a possibility that he was trying to give a hint to his opponents that, look, you guys want to play politics, you want to play the competition game, the personal credentials game. You don't want to go there. I can play that game better than you can. And I think this is a hint to them that they should back off and they should get back to the question at hand, which is the truth or falsehood of what each of them is saying. Did Paul teach the true doctrine, the true gospel, or did they? Was Paul wrong? That's the only question that really matters, not who is the bigger fish in the pond. And so, I think we have finished discussing chapter 1, and we will go into chapter 2 in the next video, and I hope you'll be there. Good night.